What is up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of State of the Steelers. I'm Daniel J. And man, that game was something else, wasn't it? I mean, I hope everybody's now gotten that loss out of their system, ready to turn the page and look on to what's going on for the Pittsburgh Steelers going on forward. The season's not over, y'all. You know, the Steelers are now what, 8-3. They're still first place in the division, even if the Ravens were to win on Monday night against the Chargers. It doesn't mean anything. You know, the Steelers are going to still be half a game. Plus, they have the head-to-head tiebreaker. And so, with that being said, I think that, you know, the Steelers are okay. But obviously, that was a hard loss, in my opinion. You know, the Pittsburgh Steelers just didn't do what they were supposed to do in this game. You know, they came out and it started off okay. You know, the offense was moving back and forth, but there's some questionable decisions, and you know, the defense looked strong early on, but it just didn't last. And we'll get into all those things. But we're going to talk about all facets of the game. We're going to start off with the coaching. You know, I thought that the coaching in this game against the Cleveland Browns was just horrific. I mean, on all facets of the game. You know, the Steelers have been a team that, and we'll start off on defense a little bit. You know, defense has played well. Defense has done good, especially if the guys get home. However, in this game against the Browns, they were continuing to play the same style of game from the beginning of the game, where it was some freezing rain, and they were in the elements. But towards the end of the game, obviously, the weather factor became increasingly different. Right, it started to turn into snow. It started to pile on, and yet the Pittsburgh Steelers were still trying to create pressure with their outside linebackers, play a single high safety throughout the entire game, which it hasn't been what quarterbacks are struggling with right now. You know, offensive quarterbacks in the NFL are struggling with cover two and single high safety. I get it. You know, you want Minka to be back there and do his thing. Unfortunately, Minka hasn't done his thing for a while when it comes to the interception or the splash play. It just hasn't been there. And you know, you have him back there, and I think it puts him in a compromising position where he is the last person, you know, standing there. And usually you have two deep routes where, all right, if he's going to one, the quarterback's going to target the other. And so I saw that was still continuing throughout the game, and I thought that played a huge role in perhaps maybe Minka and TJ Watt not being effective. And you know, if Minka started moving one way and the ball went the other, I mean, he's got to stop and go the other direction. Normally in normal weather games, he's probably able to do that pretty easily and quickly. In snow in the manner that they were in, it's probably a lot slower to move. In fact, there was some persons that were talking on mainstream media that were talking about how things change in the snow. Now, although, yeah, it's hard to see maybe perhaps, but the defensive players are a little bit slower. The outside edge guys can't get up the field as quickly. You know, you're more reactionary when you're on defense, and the offensive player knows where they're going. And if you're playing, you know, still man-to-man coverage, and you're having a guy and you're expecting a cornerback or a safety to stick with somebody who makes one move one way and then turns the other way, and it's just going to be is not the best formula for success, in my opinion. But the Pittsburgh Steelers, in my opinion, when it comes to the coaching stuff, they don't change. You know, I think that they do minor adjustments, and there's been times where we have seen defenses shut down offenses, you know, in the second half. But that's if the offense continues to try to do the same thing that they have been doing. If the offense tries to change anything, or there's a change or an adjustment during the halftime on the offensive side, it's kind of looked like this sometimes, you know, where the defense, especially in the later part of games, don't hold off to their end of the bargain. And I think it's because they're still implementing the same thing that they've done without changing or adapting to what now the offense is doing from the opposition. And I think it really played, it was really, I think one of the main things why the Pittsburgh Steelers fell defensively in this game and allowed the Cleveland Browns to put up 24 points. You know, offensively, I mean, you have to question Arthur Smith at this point. I put out a tweet in the middle of the, you know, right towards the end of first half, middle of the second quarter. where I was like, I thought we got rid of Matt Canada. I mean, this has become predictable to the extreme. And the Pittsburgh Steelers, again, under Mike Tomlin, don't really do any adjustments or whatever. Even he talks about it before going into games and coming out of games, where he'll say, we just got to execute better. We're not changing the game plan, yada, yada, yada. And to me, this was very reminiscent of what we saw with the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Buffalo Bills last year in the playoffs, where weather was a thing. And it felt like the Pittsburgh Steelers didn't prepare enough for the weather. They prepared for a snow out storm. And when they changed the date and it wasn't like that, they went in there as if it was still a snowy storm. They ran the ball over and over again. By the time they put the ball in the air, they were down by several points. They became what's the word I'm looking, predictable. And so it just didn't work out for the Pittsburgh Steelers in that situation there. But yeah, that's kind of what I saw. But even more so, like I think that if the Steelers do not make a first down, if they pass the ball on first down, this would be an example, and you'll watch this during the games. If the Steelers pass the ball on first down, and if it's an incomplete or no gain or even a sack, even if there's a loss, the next down is always going to be a run. It's just been that way. Now, if the Steelers run well on first down, then the next play is, like, if they get 5 yards or more, the next play, it's probably about 65% chance it's going to be a pass. And I've noticed this, what's the word I'm looking like for? Familiarity. I've seen this pattern going back and forth as far as when they decide to run, when they decide to pass, and it's becoming predictable. Analytics is a thing of the game, and I think that at this point, analytics are showing that when the Steelers are in certain downs and distances, they're going to run a certain play or a certain type of play, and they don't move from it. And I think that's a huge reason why we've seen, like, for instance, this offense maybe perhaps tailored down a little bit as the weeks go by with Russell Wilson in there. I mean, I think that that's what it looks like to me, that the offense is getting figured out every single game, and it's gotten to the point where they're having struggles putting the ball into the end zone. And now they're doing this 2 quarterback set stuff, which I get. I saw that. I thought it should have been utilized sooner, to be honest with you. I thought Justin Fields should have came in very similar to what Tyson Hill had done to the Browns before. Thought it should be there, but it didn't. It is what it is. But I just felt like it didn't feel like a natural flow when it was coming in and going. In fact, there was one point in the game where Justin Fields is coming on and Isaac Seumalo and Zach Frazier are running off the field because they don't understand, or they didn't know that was what was going on. And communication was poor. I think it was like 4th down and like 2 on that play. And the ball got snapped right as, time was about to run out on the play clock there. And it was a loss for a couple of yards. They had Connor Hayward back out there as the possible H-back next to Justin Fields. I can tell you that every defense in the NFL was everybody in the stands probably too, and everybody watching the game would have known that ball was going to be in Justin Fields' hands. There was no threat of an RPO or any of those type of things with Connor Hayward back there. Which brings the question about personnel, to be honest with you. I think that the decisions at the Pittsburgh Steelers with personnel offensively, like the refusal to play Mike Williams, having Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin out there as much as they are, which I think Calvin Austin is an okay, good receiver. I thought he had a game not too long ago. I called it. I told everybody, go and get him on your fantasy team for this week, because I think they're going to end up utilizing him, and they ended up doing so. I put my money where my mouth was and went and did that to for myself, and he ended up giving me about 19 points that game. I digress. I do think that when it comes to Van Jefferson and Calvin Austin, I'd prefer to see Calvin Austin out there than Van Jefferson. Now, Mike Williams, we haven't seen a lot of. Maybe there's a reason we haven't seen a lot of him. It seems like maybe perhaps he's still coming along. Maybe he still has some things to learn. But I think he's a more of a threat out there than Van Jefferson that could relieve some pressure off of the other guys. The Pat Fryermuth, the George Pickens, the even Jalen Warren coming out of the backfield. I think that when you have Mike Williams out there, that's going to open up more of your offense just because of the threat of the possibility that you have two guys that can go down the field to make plays. So personnel has been a question mark for me when it comes to the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't know. I would normally think maybe that's something that's on Tomlin, but this has been something that has followed Arthur Smith for a while. A lot of people used to question why he was playing certain players and not certain players. Not even in his time with Atlanta with Bijan Robinson and other players like that. And so, to me, I just think that the offensive game plan was a little bit too predictable. I understand that it was a short week and they probably didn't want to implement a lot, and confuse the young players. But I mean, I don't know. You just can't go out there and perform like that and expect to win. And finally, when it comes to the biggest coaching loss, in my opinion, that's going to be down to Mike Tomlin. Like the decisions that he made through and through this game were just, I mean, they were amateur, JV, if we were to use one of his Tomlinisms. Going forward on fourth downs and not being able to get those fourth down attempts, and in the moments that they were going at them, like for instance, early on in the game, they went forward on fourth down a couple of times. They tried to kick a 58-yard field goal in the elements, which most of the time I think Boz can do that. I got confidence in him. Even in that kick, I felt like I had confidence in him to make it. But was it as much confidence as I've had, any other kick that he's made this year? No, of course not. I mean, it was in some pretty. It was in the elements. It was in the weather. It was freezing out there, rain, stuff like that. Wind was starting to kind of gust back and forth. I just felt that wasn't the maybe the right opportunity. And then they went for it again and didn't get it around midfield. And I get it. You want to be aggressive. You want to take control of the game. I even said it in my pregame show that, hey, the Steelers need to take control early in the game, put up points in the game on the board early. That way they give this Cleveland Browns team no reason to play. They're 2-8. They're not doing anything. You come up, you get up on them 14-0. They're probably going to pack it in early. Not the case here. I mean, you have to be able to be aggressive, but not also at the expense of the possibility of hurting yourself. I get it that the defense was doing very well early on in the first couple of drives, but can you imagine how many points the Pittsburgh Steelers could have put up, even if there were 2 field goals or something like that? If they had punted those balls in those situations and gotten, the Cleveland Browns within the 10-yard line or within the 20 yards versus having them on the 40. And then when they get the ball back, even though the Browns are going 3 and out, but now they have to traverse the Pittsburgh Steelers offense, that is, across the field. Versus if they would have kicked it in there at the 20, and then they got the ball at the 40 or something like that, they're probably getting in more reasonable, manageable field goal range. Now, I know we don't want to hear that. We want to hear touchdowns, but in a game where the Pittsburgh Steelers lost by, it's like 5 or 6 points, 2 extra, field goals goes a long way. And you take control of the game a little bit better, in my opinion. You're probably having the Cleveland Browns panicking a little bit more if they're not putting up points early on or the offense ain't doing anything. That puts them in some positions where they're going to make some more risk, in my opinion. And the Pittsburgh Steelers had a few turnovers in this game. They could have had more had they increased the urgency from the Browns team and get them into more obvious passing down situations and things of that nature early on. But then you also have the timeout situation with Mike T. And that is unacceptable. Like, I don't understand how many times he gets this wrong. There are times where he calls it, and I'm like, I'm not sure if that was the right moment to call it. He'll call the timeout where it's like 4th and half a yard or something, and they have the field goal team out there. And then afterwards, they'll bring up their offense and they'll get the first down. And then you'll have times where it's like 4th and 4, and, it's a longer distance. And, the offense goes out there and they're obviously trying to get the other team, the Steelers, to jump. And yet he allows that team to run out the clock all the way down and not take a timeout. Or I think this is the second time this year where he takes a timeout when he doesn't need to on defense, when the clock's already stopped, and loses a timeout for his offense when they're needing to go down the field and score. Those things have happened too many times. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying he obviously Mike Tomlin's not a bad coach, but when it comes to time management, he's one of the worst. That just is what it is. And I don't understand why that job hasn't been, um, maybe perhaps gotten somebody else with a little bit more experience, or maybe a little bit better resume when it comes to being in those situations. Some sort of former offensive coordinator. I don't know, to say, hey, this is when you should call the timeout. This is when you shouldn't call the timeout. Somebody has to be there, because this is just ridiculous. I can't understand why it's like this. It's horrible. But overall, the coaching staff, I think, had more to do with this loss against the Browns than the actual players and what happened on the field. The decisions that were made and when they were made and how they were made were questionable at best. Predictability on offense, the lack of adjustment on defense, especially when it came to the weather, and the time management is really what blew this game. Personnel as well, if you want to throw that in there. I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers have a really good chance and opportunity to do something and go play. And get somewhere far, but they have to play sound football, and that includes in the coaching division and department. We're going to take a quick break. When we get back, we're going to talk more about the offense and the defense and where to go from here. Don't go anywhere. What is up, everybody? Welcome back. Thank you for tuning in with us and sticking with us. Before we get back into the conversation, I'll remind you guys of our website, stillcurtainnetwork.com, your one-stop shop for Pittsburgh Steelers news and coverage. Go check us out there when you're done with watching or listening to this podcast. And don't forget to go check us out on YouTube as well, on Still Curtain Network YouTube channel, where I and Shannon White, let's call him Shannon Smith, Shannon White, come out on a show called The Hangover. You don't want to miss it. It airs live on YouTube Monday nights at 9 p.m. Eastern. All right, let's get back into the conversation. We're going to talk about the offense first. We'll just talk about the quarterback position. Russell Wilson, he was 21 for 28, 270 yards, had one touchdown, but was sacked for 4 times, 22 for 22 yards. And, I just think that, offensively, the quarterback position, Russ has been, I think he was more accurate in this game. Obviously, the completion percentage was better there. I think that, in my opinion, I mentioned this earlier, I think they should have used Justin Fields a little bit earlier in the first half of the game. I think he even mentioned that when he was running out there, he felt that he probably could have gotten a touchdown, but he went out there cold and things like that, and so he didn't get an opportunity to warm up. But when it comes to Russ, he took some sacks out there. There was a couple of them that I thought there was nothing he could do, but there was a handful of them, like 2 of them. About half of the ones that he took, including the strip sack, where he kind of just held onto the ball a little bit and was a little bit, not that cautious with the ball in his hand. And he held on in the pocket. There were several times where I'm like, throw the ball. And like, even if it's to throw it away, like, you don't have that much time. You have Myles Garrett on the other side, and he was playing a very strong defensive game. He even had a moment where he embarrassed Zach Frazier, and Zach Frazier hasn't been embarrassed much this year. And he ran right through him on some sort of like trap play where he went around, swiveled around the defensive end and went the defensive tackle and went straight up the middle towards to Zach Frazier, and it didn't go well. But overall, I think that it's a huge concern for me at this point that the Pittsburgh Steelers are not being able to get the ball into the end zone. I'm not sure if that's a Russ thing. I know that when Justin Fields was in the game, he was a lot more successful in the red zone, per se. I don't know. Like I mentioned before, Justin Fields he mentioned how he was cold in the game and just coming in a couple of times at a time there. I think if you're going to have something where you're going to be implementing him, maybe perhaps you need to use him a little bit more often than what you were using him, just to kind of keep him warm and into the game. But those red zone opportunities, I think they need to open up more of the Justin Fields package in those moments. It didn't work out for the Steelers when it came down to 4th and short. They did some questionable things, including, throw the ball deep on a pass play there on a third down, I believe it was, which I get. If all you do is run with Justin Fields, it's going to be a little bit too predictable. But do some more of those RPOs where you're throwing the ball. Not necessarily it's just the run to the running back or run for the quarterback, but also throwing a throwing option to the tight end and the flat, similar to like what Russell Wilson has done on his play action passes with Darnell Washington. Get something like that going on where you have a big guy with the ball in his hand on, trying to get 1 or 2, 3 yards. The way he falls forward, you have a better chance of getting the ball there. The offensive line, they struggled obviously with Myles Garrett, and I think that as the snow came down, they got somewhat better, but I think that has more to do with the snow being a factor for the defensive side of the line of scrimmage. But early on throughout the game, I felt that the Browns line was more physical than the Steelers line, and that goes offensively and defensively. Running backs, Jaylen Warren, he outsnapped Najee Harris, and from what I was able to actually, from what the eye test from looking at the game, I felt that, Najee did a better job Jaylen Warren did a better job than Najee in this game. They're a 1-2 punch. I think that Najee couldn't get going. Just, I guess the weather, which it shouldn't be an excuse because both teams had to deal with it. You know what I mean? I just feel that maybe perhaps having a lot of, players from down south, from Georgia, maybe not playing a lot of these type of games, which Jameis Winston hadn't played. I think this was his coldest game. So it's not really a good excuse to have. I know that Pickens made that excuse at the end of the game that, oh man, the weather, the Browns aren't that good at all. He was just being a sore loser. He may not be wrong. I think he might be right, but that's not something that you put out there like that because it makes you look like a sore loser, especially at the end of the game when he's fighting at the back of the end zone with Newsome. He was not even in the play when the Hail Mary happened. Nobody jumped up for it. Everybody just kind of watched it. I think I think that they saw, maybe perhaps they saw, was it the Commanders? When they were practicing or studying the Commanders and they had that Hail Mary pass against the Bears, they're like, hey, if somebody stands around and catches the tip, it's easier. Well, somebody still has to jump up and try to catch it first. Just letting the defense go up there and bat it down isn't going to work. And so I thought that was the execution, and it's a Hail Mary for a reason. It's not going to be a play that you expect to go for you most of the time, but in that type of situation, the way the Pittsburgh Steelers played it, it's never going to go for him like that. And so offensively, like I said, I thought it wasn't the best. Jaylen Warren was 11 carries for 45 yards, had a touchdown along the 15 yards. Najee Harris was 16 for 41, 11 yards, 11 long, 41 yards, no touchdowns. Justin Fields carried the ball 3 times for 26 yards, 30-yard long. So in reality, he had one really, really good run, and the rest of them, he went backwards. Cordell Patterson, let's talk a little bit about the offensive players that are out there. And this probably should have been along with the personnel aspect that we're talking about. But Cordell Patterson out there, especially on that 2-point conversion, you're going to throw a fade ball to Patterson in that moment. I don't get it. And then no offense to Connor Hayward. I think Connor Hayward is an awesome person. I just don't know if he would actually be on the 53-man roster if his brother wasn't on the team. I don't know why he's on the field in certain situations. They'll have him on the field blocking instead of Darnell Washington, whether it's on the outside or in the backfield. Like when you have Pat Freiermuth, you have Darnell Washington, you have Pruitt out there. When it comes to catching the ball, in the red zone jump ball situation or blocking, I think there's every one of those situations you have those three other tight ends in there than Connor Hayward. Now maybe Connor does, something for the special teams and maybe he has a role there. But to see him out there constantly and losing on blocks and not really participate. I mean, where does he fit on this team? I just don't see it, and I feel like it's actually being a hinder to the team having Connor Hayward out there so often, especially when you're trying to run the ball. It's not the best. It's not NFL varsity level. And I know he was a good running back or something like that in college, and he did well there, and he was a tight end, and it was an awesome thing to see somebody under 6 foot, being tight end. It's a spectacle or whatever you want to call it. He's the brother of Cam Hayward, and Cam. I mean, he did okay this week too. He played well. Like I said, I think the both sides of the line weren't as physical as the Browns, but we'll say that for the defensive side. I'm just at the point where I think I'd rather see the other three tight ends, especially Pat Freiermuth and Darnell Washington in the red zone. I want to see those guys being the guys that are going to be targeted for that fade ball that went to Cordell Patterson. Cordell Patterson, he played well before his injury, but I'll be honest, he's looked a lot slower since he's come back. Looks a lot heavier too. And I think that those two things may have a coordination with each other. He's gotten heavier, the injury, so it's made him a little bit slower. And at his age, being a little bit slower and heavier isn't showing up on the way you want it. Now, maybe you get him a little bit more in shape and then bring him back in. And I think he'll do excellent. But I think I'd rather see Calvin Austin back there on kickoff returns at this point. I think he is a more explosive, dynamic player in the special teams, and has already shown and proven that he has the ability to bob and weave in between traffic on punt returns to take it to the distance. He's had, even if he hasn't only taken one to the house, he's actually done. He's had quite a few runs that maybe didn't get all the way there, but if he had something similar to that on a kickoff return, I mean, you're probably seeing an increased amount of yardage there, maybe the 35 or the 40 start off versus always starting off at the 30 or before. It's, in my opinion, I don't know. The Steelers hadn't used a running back on the kickoff return for a long time. It's always been a receiver for a while. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember the last time there was a running back returning kicks, maybe Davenport or something like that. I think he did it once. And then they changed this new rule. Now we have two running backs back there, and nothing against Jalen Warren or anything like that. But I just feel that maybe a Calvin Austin out there, or, somebody else with a little bit more experience with kickoff returns might be better for this team. As far as the pass catchers go, Calvin Austin had 3 targets for 78 yards. He had the most yards, had a touchdown. It was 3 receptions on 3 targets. So he caught everything that went his direction, which is good. I mean, he's a guy that I think that I've had the most concern when it comes to his hands. Separation and getting open, not so much. He's got the speed to do so. However, the targeting area to get him the ball is a little bit smaller given his size. But, yeah, he's shown to be a valuable asset. He's been more what's the word I'm looking for? I've been more confident in his ability to come down with the ball than I have been recently. Pat Freiermuth had 4 receptions for 59 yards on 4 targets. George Pickens had 4 receptions for 48 yards, 31 long, 7 targets. George had a rough game, especially afterwards. He was acting up again. And it's getting to the point where it's embarrassing, to see somebody go out there and do these things that he's doing, fighting with the other players. And it's concerning because I feel like at a certain point it's going to cost the Steelers. He's going to be suspended for a game or something like that. The Steelers offense without him, it's not good. I mean, it wouldn't, in my opinion, it wouldn't be it wouldn't be a great offensive showing. I think we'd see a lot of teams bring in a lot of players into the box, and hey, maybe the Steelers can hit some things over the top without George. But overall, I mean, I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers need him as that number one wide receiver. And I'll be honest with you, I'm just a little bit worried he's going to find himself in a place where he's going to be suspended or so. You know, I was kind of worried when he did the face mask thing against the Cowboys. Fighting is not one is something that typically can get you ejected. If it was like on the last play of the game, I don't know how that would work. So I'm hoping nothing ends up happening. I'm sure it'll be a couple of fines for him, but he needs to mature a little bit. You know, I know he was having, it seemed like he was getting past all his problems and the Pittsburgh Steelers were winning and putting on points. But this is the NFL. You're not going to be able to, put up points in that manner every single week. You know, the schedule is going to get harder. And if you're getting frustrated now, I mean, that's going to be a game plan for the opposition for a while. Hey, this guy gets frustrated. Let's get into his head. He's going to make a mistake, and it's going to cost his team. I mean, if I was coaching up against George Pickens, that's exactly the first thing I would say. All right, let's look over to the defensive side. You know, like I said, they had some turnovers. I thought that the turnover at the end of the game, Deontay Jackson, I thought that was the stealer of the game. However, the Steelers didn't move the ball there, and they had a horrible punt by Corliss Waitman. I was wondering, maybe that's why they kept going for those fourth downs. So I was in the game, or not in the game. I was at the game last week against the Baltimore Ravens, and I noticed that in pregame warmups, Corliss Waitman was he was shanking some punts. It was more than one. It was a few. And during the game, he had one that was that didn't go off right as well in the Ravens game. I think it had a good bounce or something like that, or a penalty. But I remember there was a punt that he kind of shanked in the Ravens game, and then obviously the bad shank there against the Browns. You know, Presley Harvin, I felt like his major problems were the cold. You know, kicking in the cold is different. You know, it's like kicking a brick, and so a little bit concerned there. I'm hoping that, it's just a couple week thing, just a spell. He'll shake it off and he'll get back to kicking how he had been, because he had been a huge component for this Pittsburgh team. And the reason why is he's been able to flip the field. He's been able to down teams on the other side, then the 20. He was doing an amazing job just in the last couple of games. I'm not sure if the weather has had something to do with it, but he's going to have to get that going quite a bit better. You know, if the Pittsburgh Steelers want to make a run, they're going to have to be able to control the field, especially against some of these high-powered offenses that the Steelers are going to be going up against here in the next couple of weeks. You know, the Bengals, they're not doing well as a team, but offensively, they're striking quite a bit. And, if you're giving them a short field to work with, it's probably not going to work well for you. So the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to have to score. They're going to have to put some touchdowns on that game, and they're going to have to hold on to the ball and create some time of possession to limit the amount of time that the Bengals are on the field if they want to win that game. But defensively, the turnovers were good. I think they played well early on. I think as the game progressed and the elements became a factor, the defense became less of one. Jameis Winston was able to complete a lot of his passes down the field, even though he was in the elements. Nick Chubb, he wasn't that big of a factor in the running game. But when it comes to the passing game, Jameis Winston was 18-27 with one touchdown. I mean, with no touchdowns, one interception, and it had a sack for 0 yards. And so relatively clean for him. The Pittsburgh Steelers pressured him a handful of times. Nick Herbig got in there and got the strip sack on him, which, I think was another turning point in the game where the Pittsburgh Steelers could have, gone in there and taken control. They had their opportunities. The Steelers kind of struggled when they covering Jerry Jeudy out there. The receivers on the refs, they stink, but they weren't calling pass interference on either side, and there was quite a bit going back and forth offensively, defensively on both sides. So defensively, as I mentioned earlier, I think they need to start doing some more of that two safety, two eye safety, maybe cover two look, um, and um, and start really making these quarterbacks throw in tight windows because this man to man stuff. I mean, it works, it's good, but these are NFL players. If you're constantly showing that, they're going to throw in some crossers and things like that, especially in the elements like this. It's not going to work out for you. And the Pittsburgh Steelers don't play in a dome. So, the rest of the teams that they play are the AFC North. Neither of them play in the dome. The two teams that they don't play that are in the AFC North are the Eagles and the Chiefs. The Eagles is the one away. That's been a stadium that the Steelers have not won in, or a city that the Steelers have not won in quite a while. So, this game and these games are going to have to, they're going to have to toughen up, and they're going to have to be able to go through the elements, because that's what we're going to see. The Pittsburgh Steelers are going to see that the rest of this year. I know that George Pickens talked about the elements being an issue. Well, this ain't Georgia, my man. This is going to be cold. It's going to be cold. Well, guys, that's all I got for you guys today. Steelers lose. I'll be back next week, same time, same place. Talk about the Bengals preview game. I think the Steelers can have a bounce back week. I expect them to, especially having a long weekend or a long mini bye, so to speak, after playing on a short week. And we'll see. I mean, I don't think it's over. I think they just need to look into the mirror, as the title says, and really point out the things that they can control and stop doing those things, because I don't think that it's anything that the Browns did to the Steelers in this game that lost it for them. I think it was the Steelers beating the Steelers, their decision-making, the coaching, the lack of timeouts, the personnel management, the plays calls that were called in, the inability to adjust to the weather, scheme-wise or otherwise. Even early on, Myles Garrett was getting a lot of pressure on Russell Wilson, and I mean, we didn't see a lot there to scheme him out. He continued to get pressure until the weather became a factor. That's the way I saw it, at least. Well, we got a bye week. It's time to reflect. Steelers are still 8-3, still first place in the AFC North. And if they can take care of business and do what they need to do, they're going to be in a good place. They're going to be an opportunity to do something later on. But they need to take this loss here and learn from it. So with that being said, I'm out of here, guys. You guys have a safe week. If you're listening to this on Apple, hit that 5-star review. Anywhere else, like, subscribe. You know what to do without that. All that being said, peace.